Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ron Faucheux, President of Clarus Research, and Michael Petruzzello, Managing Director of the D.C. office. The two of them will be hosting our webinar today. And Ron, if you'd like to go ahead and get started.
Sure. Thank you very much. Well, we had an election that I think most people consider to have been a stunner. It was, I think, hard for a lot of people in the media and a lot of talking heads and pundits to think that ultimately Donald Trump would be elected president, but he was. And I think that does speak some to media bias, and I think it does speak some to isolation of elites in the country. But there we have it. Looking at the presidential election, just a quick overview. Trump now has 290 electoral votes, which is 20 more than you need to win, and there's still some votes out, but he clearly has the victory here. What is interesting, though, is that Clinton is winning the popular vote. Our slide shows by 225,000. The latest number is about 235,000, and it's growing. It has been growing over the last 24 hours, so she could well have a popular vote lead of over 300,000 when it's over with, which puts her in, historically puts her in into the Al Gore, Samuel J. Tilden, and Grover Cleveland club, candidates for president who lost the election but who won the popular vote. Now that's a little historic matter of interest, and I'm not sure is much of a consolation for Democrats today, but it is something that's interesting, and it is relevant when we talk about the polls later. In terms of congressional elections, the Republicans lost 2 seats in the Senate. They went from 54 seats to 51 or 52 seats, and the reason why there's a 51 and 52 is that my home state of Louisiana, which is always a little different in politics, has a runoff in the Senate race in December. So that hasn't been decided yet, although based on everything we can see, the Republicans are highly favored to win that seat. So the Republican majority would slip from 54 to 52 seats in the Senate. Now, even though that's a loss for Republicans, it's a lot better than it looked like it could have been. There were 8 or 9 Republican Senate incumbents who looked like sitting ducks a year ago or 6 months ago, or as recently as a couple of months ago, and they were all reelected except for 2 of them in Illinois and New Hampshire. The New Hampshire race was extremely close. So even though the Republicans lost seats, it was good news for them because they held the Senate majority and they held their losses below what was expected. The same thing for the House. The Republicans had a pretty significant House majority, the best they've had since the 1920s. It looks like they've probably lost about 5 seats, maybe 6 seats in the House at this point. So their majority will thin slightly, but they're still going to have a pretty good majority. So in terms of the congressional power structure, it's going to be a little less Republican in terms of members, but the Republicans will maintain control of the process. Going to the next slide, looking at state politics for a minute. And what we see here in state elections, the state elections are of course very important. People in Washington forget this, but governors and state legislatures do real work, and they pass real policies, and oftentimes they have more influence on what's happening in the country than Congress does. So it is something to keep in mind. The Republicans actually won some modest gains in the state level. There were only 12 governorships up this year, and the Republicans increased their number from 31 to 32. which is a one-seat gain. And the Democrats probably lost a net of one seat. The thing, and there's one governor from Alaska who's an independent. There's one gubernatorial race in South Carolina that's very close. The Democratic challenger has about a 5,000 vote lead out of almost 5 million votes cast, and it looks like that could go into a recount. But it sort of looks like the Republicans probably picked up one gubernatorial seat, which gives them a pretty hefty majority of state governors. In terms of state legislatures, there were legislative elections in legislative chambers around the country. The Republicans, again, won modest gains of picked up 43 seats, and which is of a much bigger number. And they won control of several legislative chambers in Iowa, Kentucky, Minnesota, and they tied the Connecticut Senate. So small Republican gains there. Next thing we want to look at is ballot issues around the country, and every election year there's always ballot issues that voters have to face. Some of them are put on the ballot by state legislatures. Some of them are put on the ballot by citizen-sponsored initiatives. This year we had 160 ballot measures, which is a little lower than the typical average of about 175 in a presidential election year. And the three big issues were really, as the slide says, pots, guns, and wages. 7 marijuana initiatives won, one lost, and there's one, as of yesterday anyway, that was in doubt. There were 5 minimum wage referenda, 4 won, 1 lost, and there were 4 gun control measures, and 3 won and 1 lost. So for the most part, a lot of these ballot initiatives were successful, and those of you know who have been involved in ballot issues, it's a lot tougher to pass them than it is to kill them. So getting these done is actually a pretty good political feat. The next thing we want to look at is the overall sense of what happened in the electorate. Then we'll look at the polls. In terms of turnout, it looks like it's ending up not quite as high of a turnout as most people Tuesday during the day thought it was going to be. Right now, roughly, it looks like about 54% of the voting age population voted, which, based on a quick calculation I made, is probably equivalent to about 68% of registered voters. And how you define registered voters is another issue, but that's I think a rough indication. Now, in swing states, 64% of voting age population voted, which is equivalent to about 80% of registered voters. So you can see the massive money that went in the swing states did raise the participation probably 10 to 12%. In terms of sort of the zeitgeist of the election, Trump broke all the rules. He made every possible mistake, and he won. For people who have taught political campaigning and been involved in political campaigning for years, it was almost like he had a checklist of the things not to do, and then he proceeded over time to do them, and was elected anyway. And I think, ultimately, and this is something we had talked about over the course of the election, but, he represented something bigger to many voters, and that was really a chance for revolt, a flushing out of the system, and the tactical mistakes, the things that he said, problems in his background, all of those things just didn't matter. His supporters ultimately wanted to vote for big change, and they did it, and that was the way it came out. The other thing that I thought was particularly interesting is, of course, Trump's victory was stunning, but his ability to bring out voters also helped Republicans down ballot. That was equally impressive. The chairman of the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee, just a few weeks ago, after the Trump Access Hollywood video came out, advised his members. He said, we're dealing with a rough situation here. It's going to be like landing an airplane in a hurricane. But and Republicans were scared to death the effect that Trump would have. But ultimately, the main effect that Trump had on down ballot Republicans was that he helped most of them because of the vote that he was able to get to the polls. And what was interesting about that is the vote that he got to the polls had less to do with ground game and more to do with voter interest and enthusiasm. When you're seeing presidential candidates on television and on the internet in some other forum literally every 5 minutes, it starts making the get out the vote telephone call that you get from a volunteer or a door knock that's much less important. And 4 years ago, Barack Obama taught us that a highly targeted, carefully executed ground game is effective, and that was correct, and it still is. But Donald Trump has also taught us that a big message campaign, a big media campaign that reaches into voters and turns them on is also effective in terms of turnout. The next issue we want to get to is something that there's been a lot of discussion with, and that is how did the polls do? And generally speaking, the polls didn't do very well. In fact, it was pretty embarrassing for a lot of some of the big national polling outfits. The polling average that we keep up with in the Lunchtime Politics newsletter, interestingly showed that Clinton's and one thing I need to say before anything else is all of the national polls measured the national popular vote, and Hillary Clinton won the national popular vote. 12 out of the 13 national polls show Clinton winning the national popular vote, and she won it. The problem they had was that the margins they gave her were way overblown. Ultimately, she'll win the national popular vote probably by about 0.3%, but the polls were showing she was ahead between 2 and 6%, which obviously was way off. But at the same time, the one poll that showed Trump ahead in the national popular vote was theoretically incorrect, because Trump did not win the national popular vote, and it was 2 points off, just like the polls that showed Clinton were 2 points off. So it's when you get into it, it's a little more complex than it looks on the face of it. Now, the state polls, frankly, were a mess, and I was complaining about that for a long time in our newsletter, that they were jumping all around, fluctuating, diverging from one another for no apparent reason, and made the point in the newsletter on Monday and Tuesday that 1/3 of those polls were wrong. We just didn't know which third. Well, now we know, and basically, when we look back at the state polls, we find that about 1/3 were very close, about 1/3 were way off, and about 1/3 were somewhere in the middle. So you ask, well, what happened? What was the problem there? The first thing is a small technical matter, but it is something that affected some states, particularly states like New Hampshire, for example, that there was just saturation of polling, that the poll samples were just so badly worn out between candidate advocacy calling in a presidential election, a Senate election, and a governor's election, and the constant polling by all these candidates and political committees and super PACs that the pollster, the polling vendors, data collection people were telling me, they said, don't believe any of the polls in these small states because we just can't get samples anymore. We can't get people on the cell phones, and we're having trouble getting the same people back on the landline. So that was one sort of technical issue. Another issue that everybody in the polling business is struggling with is the idea of what platform do you use in the experimentations with new methodologies. Sort of the what would be called the gold standard of political polling would be live telephone interviews on cell phones and landlines. But some people do polling based on robocalls, and some people do polling based on online interviewing. And so the whole industry is particularly as it relates to politics, is really still in an experimental stage on that. What was interesting was that all three platforms basically showed Clinton winning the national popular vote by 3 to 4%. Telephone showed her winning by 3, and online polls showed her winning by 4. So there wasn't a whole lot of difference there. The other thing, of course, are turnout models. The dirty little secret about political polling is when you do a poll, you have to make a guess. And the guess is, to what extent will various segments of the population turn out on Election Day? There's a lot of information and a lot of data that you can put together to inform that guess, but you still have to make that guess. And most of the polling, national polling firms that were in this hunt made the wrong guess. They were modeling everything based on the last race with Obama, assuming that some of those trends would continue, and some of them did not, to the extent that they thought they would be, particularly as it related to white voters, white working class voters. Some of them voted that were not factored in, particularly from rural areas. And a lot of polling has trouble reaching voters in rural areas, and that's another factor. But the big point I think we want to make here, and as it affects the business of polling and public relations and advertising and advocacy, is all the polling that we've seen over the last year and a half, the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of polls we've seen, all those polls are done for media consumption. Media organizations don't want to pay for polls, so they insist upon having everything done about as cheaply as possible. Now, that may not be true for some of the major networks in newspapers, but it is true mostly for these state polls. And so there's a lot of corner cutting in terms of quality that goes in it. And it's important to remember there's a big difference between those kind of polls that are done very quickly with low budget to get out quickly so a media organization can have a headline, and private polls that are done for private clients where much more care is taken and, frankly, more money is put into the process. And so the bottom line of all this is, yes, the polls were wrong, and there were multiple reasons why they were wrong, but it doesn't mean that polling is always wrong. And like I said, in the state polls, we can look and see that a lot of polling was right on the money, but some of it was way off. It was bouncing all over. But again, the media polling environment and the private custom research environment are really two different worlds. And that is it.
Great. Thanks, Ron. Michael?
You want to go through the takeaways?
Please.
Yeah. And, this is Michael Petruzzello. I think there's clearly a number of lessons that have come out of this very unorthodox and unconventional campaign that will, most certainly shape the future of campaign politics for, the cycles to come. I think that what Trump has done is largely tore up the traditional campaign textbook and has largely rewritten it. And winning campaigns in the future you will see, whether Republican or Democrat, will be taking chapters from that textbook and trying to apply that to their campaigns in the future. And the same will be true for any other type of campaign, whether it's political or product. And and one is really I think one of the things that Trump clearly had an ear for that many other politicians did not was the American electorate's great desire for authenticity and direct conversation. People have really grown tired of what feels like the teleprompter lines, the standard talking points, the rehearsed and nuanced policy presentations, and whether they liked it or were or found it repugnant, the way that Donald Trump spoke, that directness, that authenticity did appeal to people, and it did one thing, for better or worse for his campaign. His message got heard, and it broke through, and not only was it heard by the people who heard it, but it was shared, and to many others. So the message there is that is once again is how important it is to keep a message simple, keep it direct, keep it authentic, and keep it honest. The second thing is that as Ron pointed out, and I think the thing that most everyone missed in this campaign is the depth of the levels of frustration that exist in the American electorate today. People are frustrated, they're despondent, they're tired, they're afraid. They look at the economy today, and despite kind of any of the things that people said about improvements and increase in jobs and trajectory of the economy or the markets, they do not feel confident about their own personal finances and their future. And that just not only goes for the economy, but also for security at home, the security and the integrity of what's happening around the world. And so it became a much more emotional kind of campaign. And as a result, people connected more emotionally and connected to the kind of campaign dialogue that was more emotionally charged, and that got people motivated, and that got people engaged. And look, whether one likes or admires, or supports Donald Trump or not, he did turn out in the primaries more voters than anybody in modern Republican campaigns, more than George Bush, more than anybody else, is that he got people to the polls, he got people motivated. And that was in large part as being able to connect emotionally. And I think that was one of the things that we saw with the Clinton campaign, is that try as they might, they just weren't able to get there. And we saw that back in the convention. The attempt to really kind of connect emotionally to the electorate, to kind of with a more of a bright, shining city on a hill kind of vision for America. It was well done. It was well orchestrated. It looked great, but it did not connect emotionally. It just wasn't authentic. People didn't feel it. Outside of kind of the, I think the core base of the Democratic Party, people just weren't feeling it. I guess the other takeaway is that welcome back, America's media and press. That long, overlooked or kind of, or in terms of, particularly in terms of campaign, is set aside as kind of, advertising's, poor stepchild. Not so. Is that what Trump was able to prove was the power of earned media. Again, if he, the way he launched himself onto the political stage was through earned media, and the way he maintained his lead through the primaries was through earned media. If you go back and to say is that combined, his primary adversaries spent close to $220 million trying to prevent him from getting that nomination, and he spent less than $2 million. It was earned media that carried the day. I don't know the exact numbers. Ron may, but I think in terms of advertising and the combined, is that some say the Clinton campaign outspent him that front 2 to 1, 3 to 1, maybe more when you roll it all together. But what his campaign was able to do was to keep him in front of the American public through media, even through the crises. That rather than trying to kind of use advertising or other techniques to work around those issues, the Trump campaign kind of plowed through them head on by taking on the media, and not in a way that was as some say is through a kind of a friendly relationship. In some circles it's kind of started that way, but man, it sure did not end that way. This was earned media that was done through, in large part, a highly adversarial relationship with the press corps. The next thing I guess we'll talk about is that kind of another takeaway of this campaign is that for those of us living who live in Washington, sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't, but this idea of backlash against elitism. And, there's a certain irony, I think, that, for the Clintons, particularly for Bill Clinton, whose career was really launched through, through kind of a connection to that kind of American working class, kind of average American homeland, American heartland people. That I remember, many, many years ago when Bill Clinton decided to run against George Bush 41, and at a time when when his popularity approval rating was something like 85%, and most other people who were considering getting the race were opting out because they thought there was no way to beat Bush. A top donor asked Bill Clinton, is that why do you think you can win? And he said because it's and to use his words, not mine, it's the rednecks of America are going to rise up against this president and against with the view of his elitism, and I know I can win because I'm one of them. Over time, I think what happened is that, as often happens, is that you live in the bubble too long, you lose those connections, you kind of get away from your roots, you get a disconnection or disconnected to kind of where you started and where you become. And I think that's I think a takeaway for the Clintons is that they lost, I think, that connection to and that sensitivity to that portion of the electorate that came out in droves in this campaign, and abandoned not just the Clintons but the Democratic Party. It's those whatever you want to identify them, the blue-collar Democrats, Reagan Democrats, but that was the spearhead or I think the juggernaut of voters, in many cases new voters or people who had not voted in a long time. And it was the sense that and I think this is true for both the Republicans and Democrats, is that, I get this, we get the sense as voters that you look down at us, and that you don't, respect us, and you don't, consider us, our voice is important, and I'll tell you what, and, is that, let me remind you, we're in charge. You work for us. And that was the message that the electorate gave. I think, in terms of, I don't even know where to begin, or we can do a whole another webinar just on crisis management and and the do's and don'ts of crisis management as they apply to this campaign. But there certainly were plenty of them. From Trump's many digressions and scandals and what, and then I think the overriding one, probably for the Clinton was the email scandal, and it's just one thing you really learned is that you can't put your head in the sand or ignore them and hope it goes away. I think for the Clinton campaign, the general rule that that the Clintons had used very well over the years in managing scandals and crises, for which they had some experience, which is the quote, change the subject. It didn't work. I don't know if really is today that simply let's just change the narrative, let's change the subject is always or certainly wasn't the effective crisis management strategy for particularly on that issue. Issues. We're only kind of, I think, less than 72 hours since the vote. I think a lot of people are still recovering from their hangovers of Tuesday, but you're already seeing, which is really one of I think the great things about American politics is the transition of power and how smoothly and how quickly that has already taken place. Is that the campaign is literally hours old, but we're already starting to see an agenda shaping up. We're starting to talk about Trump's first 100 days, which actually are going to be like, when you look at the schedule, is really going to be like about 64 days or something like that. So is that he is going to start to you're starting to see what those issues are going to be and what's going to come first. There's a couple of things that do have to happen first, and one thing that'll be interesting to watch is that even with control of both houses, does not give the Republicans a blank check to write policy. If you go back to 1994, I think may have been the last time, or a time when Republicans won both houses and also held the White House. Is that maybe point out Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House, and we had our contract with America, and there was going to be a tidal wave of policy changes that were going to usher in kind of the Republican agenda, regulatory reform, tax reform, every other type of reform. And to go back and then think about how much do they actually ever get passed or ever get enacted? Virtually nothing. They overreached, and there will be, I think, as we get into this Congress, a temptation to overreach. But is that Republicans do not have 60 votes, so they do not have a supermajority in the Senate to just push things through, and I think and the American electorate will be very mindful of who and what they put in office in terms of what policies can be or should be achievable. So what kind of coalition that Trump is able to put together, and he's going to have to do that fairly soon, will be very interesting to watch. Because he's not only going to have to create some type of coalition with Democrats, but then you also have this block of never Trump coalition people in the Congress who vowed never Trump, and now will have to work with this administration. The administration will have to work with them. Although Donald Trump doesn't really come across to me as a very forgiving man, and it will be interesting to see how those people are dealt with as policymakers and leaders, and what the implications of that will be for policy. So that'll be an interesting to watch. But I think in terms of what issues are going to pop up first, second, third, certainly, that you already saw, if you saw Mitch McConnell's press conference yesterday, they're already talking about Obamacare and repealing or reworking Obamacare. Be shocked if that doesn't come up. But also be very interested to see is that now it's going to be the onus on the Republicans to not just say repeal Obamacare, but it's going to have to say, but are we going to replace it with this? And so they got when the responsibility of government is you have to have a plan, and it'll be interesting to see what that plan is. Immigration is that while I think most people expect that Trump's rhetoric on immigration will be tempered, but that it doesn't mean that he's not going to continue to. He's going to have to move forward on some type of immigration plan, immigration reform. Trade, TPP is off the table, and I think that's not going to come back anytime soon. We'll start to see, I think, trade initiatives take place in other forms, probably initially more in terms of bilateral trade negotiations, but there may be a whole rethinking on WTO, but I wouldn't expect that in the first 100 days. That would be something more down the road. And then you get some of the things that are not exactly legislative, but have big implications for for America, which is going to be Supreme Court. That I don't think that Obama's going to be able to make any progress with the Supreme Court nomination during the lame duck as he had hoped. It's probably kind of by the wayside now. So one of the early opportunities that Trump will have will be to name a justice to the Supreme Court and get that and get that person confirmed. That's a big deal. And we'll I think that's going to be probably a look down. If you look down 4 or 8 years from now, will be something that will be probably a chapter in the history book of the Trump administration, because he is going to have at least one, possibly 2, maybe 3 Supreme Court nominations over the course of his administration. Most administrations don't get that opportunity, and that's going to be something to watch. Other issues that I think will come out of the box, sooner than later. Certainly tax reform, probably less so on the individual side. So I wouldn't get terribly excited about what your personal kind of tax rates are going to be in the near future. But corporate tax reform is probably something that's going to get taken up, I think, in the and not in the first 100 days, but certainly in the first year. Infrastructure will probably something that will come out early. Is that this is an area where I think the administration can get an early win by launching some investments in infrastructure and roads, bridges, and the like, which would be kind of could be a boost to the economy, create some jobs. And it's an area where I think you can get some bipartisan support. The flip side of that will be, though, is that what the economy looks like, going into next year, is that some are starting to think that we may be kind of in the beginning stages of a light, if not slightly heavier recession, but that will color a lot of what happens in the first year, but that remains to be seen. And then military, is that there's a spending bill that'll be dealt with in lame duck session, but that'll be kind of just one, I think, of many of others. Is that I think we'll see increased spending in both the military budget and with veterans care, and that's something that'll be, I think, you'll see early on. That kind of covers what will be a busy agenda. And if you thought that the campaign was crowded and chaotic and and emotional, and wait until you see what the next, from what the first 100 days of after his inauguration are going to look like. It's definitely kind of, hang on to your hats and hold your seats, because it's going to be a wild ride.
Thanks, Michael. At this time, if anyone has any questions, please submit via the chat feature on the webinar, or send them to me, Britt Jordan, via email, and we'll take those questions at this time. So we have a question from Salter Baxter to Michael, if you could elaborate a little bit more on what we can expect from Trump with regards to the environment.
Hey, in regards to the environment? Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
What can we expect from Trump on the environment?
I think that, clearly, the people surrounding him, and, I think go into the, as they go into this, that the, affinity will be to be, much more skeptical of climate change policies and climate change itself. I think so I think any kind of, additional climate change regulation or initiatives are going to be certainly slowed, if not ground to a halt. I think that there will be on the energy production or development side, I think there's going to be a lot of support in the administration for, kind of lifting of restrictions or increasing kind of production and exploration for natural gas and oil. Plus, as you recall, is that Donald Trump spent a lot of time in West Virginia. Took West Virginia by a significant number, and that was largely based on kind of promises to American coal and coal families that he would support coal, and so I think we're going to see more of that as well. So that will tilt against, I think, a lot of kind of the existing policies with directions towards clean energy, and so those two forces will collide at some point, and how that is resolved remains to be seen.
We have a question for a little bit more information on some cabinet positions. What can we expect?
Well, lots of names, lots of things that have certainly been flying around, I think however it turns out, I think one thing we can expect is that the makeup of the cabinet and his administration will be as unconventional and unique as his campaign itself. So there is that we probably won't see as much of the retreading of kind of former Republican White Houses as you would have seen in the past, or if a Jeb Bush had gotten elected, the makeup of this White House is going to be very much different. The kind of the names have been floating around, like for Secretary of State, people are talking about Newt Gingrich. One thing that we've learned about President-elect Trump is that he values loyalty almost above all, and people like Gingrich, who have been loyal throughout the campaign, will probably end up somewhere. And state is one, but there's also been talk about former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations John Bolton as being another. Bob Corker also, but kind of doubt that, and I doubt that they would pull kind of a leading figure out of the Senate at this point. But in Treasury Secretary, I think there's kind of a odds-on favorite of Mnuchin, who's been his finance chair and who's the chief executive of a private investment firm called Dune Capital Management. Defense is that there's some talk about people like Lieutenant General Mike Flynn, who can possibly in defense, also can end up becoming national security advisor. Jeff Sessions, who was also another early and loyal supporter, also be at defense. Giuliani is kind of a favorite right now for Attorney General. Chris Christie is being talked about as being possible chief of staff, although RNC Chairman Previs has also been talked about as being a choice for chief of staff. And then you kind of get into the rest, but there's there'll be a lot of fresh faces. That much I think we could I think we can expect. A lot of people who have not been in government before, and for some they find interesting and refreshing. For others it may be a little intimidating, but we've got some time to to see how that shakes out.
Hey Ron, we have a couple of questions for you, if that's all right.
Sure.
So the first is, what were the so-called dog whistles, and what role did race play and resentment of Obama in voters' decisions for Trump?
Well, that's a good question, an important question. It's hard to answer because it's hard to do any type of polling or research that can really determine the effect of that. But one thing I would point out is that in a number of southern states, for example, and we've seen some data from a few southern states, that Hillary Clinton actually did worse among white voters in the South than did Barack Obama. So it wasn't always about Obama's race that was the factor. I think Trump's appeal was very much centered on the idea of overturning political correctness. I think that if there was any dog whistle involved, it was that. Trump will tell you it wasn't racist. It was about excess and going too far. Liberals will say it was. So you take it as you believe it. But I actually believe that one of Trump's biggest appeals, and probably the thing that outside of economic dislocation that elected him was this idea that things were going too far. Political correctness, Black Lives Matter, demonizing police officers. I think all of that really generated a significant vote and significant interest that turned out on election day.
We also have a question about just simply, can we trust polls going forward?
Well, the answer is yes, you can trust polls going forward if they're properly done. If they're not, you can't trust polls going forward, nor should you ever have trusted those kinds of polls. I do think that even though I'm in the business of polling and in the business of talking about polls, I do think that the media has relied too heavily on polls in most recent elections. And I think the number of polls and the way they use polling to drive news coverage has gone too far. And I think they have to reassess that. I think they also have to understand and report that polls are not predictive tools. Polls have never been or should be used to predict anything. All polls tell you is where things are supposed to be at the time they're doing the interviewing, and there are always subsequent events. A poll taken before Comey's letter that pointed out that he was reopening the investigation on Clinton, there was no way they could factor that in. And then as that was rolling out, it was, you had to basically wait to see how that settled. And we were all trying to get clues in that along the way. But essentially it was something that was hard to do. So anyway, the point is, yes, you can trust polls if they're properly done, but always remember that they're scientific instruments. They have margins of error. They are sensitive to having the questions asked correctly, picking the samples right, using quality interviewing methods, and they're not predictive tools.
Great, thank you. We have a question, Michael, about what Trump's policy towards Syria and the Middle East might be and how it might be different than President Obama's.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of signals of kind of major differences in policy. Is that one is just I think more broadly the
this illustration.
The leader has muted your line. To unmute your line, press #6.
Sorry about it. We had a little phone issue there, but in terms of U.S. engagement, there's large. I think the Obama policies has been largely to for U.S. to disengage, particularly from the Middle East. Is that Trump has expressed a belief that that America needs to re-engage and be more and provide more leadership in regional peace and security in the region. That's a big difference, number one. Big difference, number two, is American policy towards Iran. As we all know, Obama spearheaded the Iran nuclear deal and the concept of rapprochement with Iran and a sharing of the region between Iran and Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries. Trump has called the Iran nuclear deal the worst deal ever and has vowed to tear it up. How that evolves, we'll see. But we're already seeing that there's been some discussions between Trump and members of Congress about renewed or strengthened sanctions in Iran. On Syria, probably not as much of a difference. Is that I think Trump believes that in terms of Syria, or that the issue to deal with first is ISIS. Is that we first and foremost must defeat ISIS, and that's the primary objective. Dealing with Assad is secondary, and so that I don't think regime change in Syria is going to be as much a priority at the outset. But we'll see as we get into the confronting ISIS. How you do that without dealing with Syria, that will be some a problem they're going to have to figure out.
Great. We have a question about Trump mending fences with women, and do you think he'll appoint any heavy hitter women to the cabinet or do anything to repair some of the problems he had during the campaign?
Haven't you heard? There's no bigger champion for women than Donald Trump. I mean, how many of you guys said that over and over again? I don't. I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. Is that, look, whether you're president of the United States, or any one of us, dealing with problems first has to start with some self-awareness that you have a problem, and we'll see if he really believes that if he has that problem. He could look at the polls and kind of where the women's vote ended up and just say, look, I was right. I'm the biggest champion for women. Now that said, I think we'll see some women appointments certainly. Whether how many there are or how far-reaching or what the composition is, that'll be a cue. I would not be very hopeful on that front. That's just my personal opinion.
Thank you. We have a question about policy with regard to China. It was a huge topic of conversation in the campaign, and what can we expect going forward with Trump?
Well, when he talked about China, is that he really wasn't. He was not really when he simplified a very complex set of issues, because it's not just a question of trade with China. It's or a balance of trade issues. It's a whole host of policies that relate to American manufacturing. American, U.S. taxes, corporate tax policies. It's all of those things that factor into how we fare as a nation vis-a-vis our partners in Asia, particularly China, and that gets back to. So I think that there's look, you just can't go to China and say we want you to change your monetary policy, or we want you to start buying more American goods. It doesn't work that way. The way it works is kind of recalibrating corporate tax policy. It's about investments and credits for American manufacturing, and those things don't happen overnight. Those are policies that will take years to develop, and many more years to, if they became economic policy, years to find their way into into the economy. I think that's a long horizon issue. I don't expect no immediate miracles on that front.
Great. Guys, I think in order to be respectful to everyone's time, we're going to do one last question, and I think this is probably on everybody's mind. What's the future for the Democratic Party?
If we had this call, 4 years ago, and after the Republicans got beat again and they lost the White House, and they said, who's going to be the future leader of your Republican Party? And I said, I think it's going to be Donald Trump. I think everyone would have hung up almost instantly, and would have sounded crazy, to say the least. So it's way too early, to predict who's going to emerge as the leaders or the next candidates for the Democrats in years from now. Clearly, there's going to need to be some reassessment, and not just for the Democrats, for the Republicans too. Is that even though the Republicans have now have the White House and the Congress, is that underneath that there is not a well-seated organization for the Republican Party. Is that this campaign has thrown both parties into disarray. Kind of their there's going to have to be a major reassessment of kind of what their vision is, what their constituent needs to look like, how they reconnect with the voters that they have lost, and how do they maintain the ones they have, and how you bring that together. And it brings us back to, I think, the topic of this conversation is that Republican and Democrat is that that this is greatly divided. There's a lot of tension out there. There's still and will remain a lot of anger, and it's going to take quite a bit of time to bring that together. And I don't think anyone can predict what that's going to look like 3 or 4 years from now.
Great. Ron, Michael, thank you so much for your time. Everyone on the phone, really appreciate you joining us. If you have any outstanding questions, we'll be sure to answer them, especially from clients. If anyone feels like clients might have questions, we'll do our best to get back to as many as we can, so feel free to submit those via email to me, and look forward to our blog series that will be rolling out over the course of the next couple of days from several of our experts here in the D.C. office. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.